Good day to you. It's morning here. I may look at, I get emails from Curt Jaimungal. You'll see him over here in the lower bitmap image. Above Curt Jaimungal are two of the most famous names on the circuit today. This has everything to do with psychology and everything to do with philosophy. But what does it have to do with science? I want to give the bright side, so that you know where I actually stand. I think that these shows are an invaluable service, but there's also a certain, I'll just say you have to be aware of what's being done to you. You're being influenced by these podcasts. Now, of course, we all think that that's antiseptic and wholesome because you need as much information as you can get. Fully conceded. We all accept that as scientists. We are not afraid of anything. What we have to do is make a distinction between what can be proved and what cannot be proved. Well, that's the whole basis of science in one sense. It sounds like I'm trying to bring up something negative. I'm not. I'm trying to show two sides of a reality, two sides of a consciousness, two sides of a psychology. So this is introspective. That's holding a mirror up to yourself, in a sense. It's really holding a mirror up to yourself and what is behind you that you turn around and look at. This is when you look away from it and hold up a mirror and see yourself in context of the industry. The industry. It's a valid and useful and I believe ultimately wholesome industry for this reason. It gets people interested in topics so that they think about them more deeply. And from that, the good result is they choose rational logic to navigate. I think it's safe to say that most of us do not perceive ourselves as scientists. But that needs to be clarified. We all have a logical subsystem. I don't see how anybody would question that. We're involved in a most interesting experiment or game or situation or existential reality. We're born, we grow up, and, later on, you leave. So there's a certain amount of time we're here. Well, my goodness, the world is so full of a number of things, I think we should all be as happy as kings. Yes, but there's a good deal of BS. And you can spin your wheels for a very, very long time. Some men for an entire lifetime or a good chunk of their lifetime until they wake up. There are levels of maturity in a man. You're not the same person when you're 5 years old as when you're 15 or when you're 35 or when you're my age, which is 70. I know I don't look it, but I am 70 years old and a few weeks now. But we're not the same person as we were in the past because we evolve. This is the true form of evolution. It's a human mind. A human mind evolves. Nothing else does. Now you could argue with that, but we're not going there. What I'm doing is attempting to create the framework of approach so that we will have a way of dealing with this plethora. I use that word a lot. It was one of my father's favorite words. Plethora just means a haphazard collection or a large number of, a plethora. But it has a certain connotation. Plethora, my father favored that word because he thought it was a funny word. I agree. But it's also a useful word. Words mean things. So let's get into this. What Curt Jaimungal sent to me, and he's been sending emails to me regularly, and I regularly click on the link because I really like Curt's approach. He's an excellent interviewer, and he's a class above Lex Friedman. They're separate, though. Lex serves a certain side of the vaudeville. Let's face it, it's for entertainment, okay? Yes, it touches on science, but that's not why we tune in. Well, it is. It is and it isn't, because we have two ways of looking at things, because we have two subsystems. We have an emotional subsystem, which I say dominates us all our lives. I mean, love is part of that. It's not part of science, is it? Well, you could philosophize about that. But I think it's safe to say that the emotions do not ordinarily enter into a logical discussion. Science is logic. It's based on rational logic. Is it based on emotion? Science isn't, but humans are. We're attracted to certain men, to certain ideas. We identify the man with the idea with certain men. This is a way of orientation. And it's also a way to get inroads into what you don't know, so that you can start to think about what you don't know. I've often thought about the gifts and talents that are given to humans at birth, and nobody knows what they are. Their parents don't know. Certainly the human doesn't know. Could be Bobby Fischer. Well, it's a matter of some chance whether Bobby ever gets exposed to chess or not. Well, if you've never thought about matter, perhaps listening to Bernardo Kastrup talk about how matter is illusion, that will get you thinking. Well, that's good. Okay, I want to take a hard line on that, because after that, I do not favor what I see, because I need to warn you. Okay, this is positive, but there is a reflection that's not as pretty as a lot of people, including myself, come to believe. We get persuaded of things. So I've always had this attitude toward philosophy. I've taken college courses in philosophy and indeed in psychology, because at the time of my life, I was in my 20s, I wanted to be a well-rounded man. I also wanted to make a living, so what I was actually studying was science, which is what you normally go to college to study. But the university was originally conceived to make a well-rounded man. You participate in a sport. You participate in drama. Well, you participate in philosophy. That's part of being a well-rounded man, is to have certain points of view. Well, those are philosophies. So we can't avoid it. So we're not afraid of it. What we want is to be rational. So that's different. That's different from hoi polloi. Hoi polloi is what we all are when we start. We're just people, okay? That means evenly divided between emotion and logic. It's a matter of maturity, of development, to develop both sides, but really what needs to be turned on consciously is your logical side, because you can go through your whole life without ever really using your logic. And I think we all realize that. If you're listening to me, I would say you certainly believe that. That is part of your philosophy, that rational logic is extremely good. Why? Be clear about that. Why is it good? It enables you to distinguish between truth and falsehood, but it's more difficult than that. It's not the truth and falsehood that is possibly obfuscating, misleading, or confusing. It's what's in between. Because we are human, and we're the only organism where the functions of logic and emotion come together. And they're separate systems. The emotional system is based on completely different premises than logic. And that could be argued, and of course is, because people have different points of view on how to fuse these or make them coordinated to become a full man. Which raises another question. Why do that? Well, wow. Why do we want to be logical and rational? Why do we want to fuse our philosophical side with rigorous logic? It's so that we'll know what we're saying so we can communicate. We're communicative beings. We're meant to work together. There are two sides to men working together. So already we have a situation where there's deception involved. It could be conscious, a liar. It could be unconscious, just someone who's saying what they say, but they're not saying it perhaps as well as they might. Perhaps they're misleading, or perhaps the opposite. Perhaps they're suggestive of really profound avenues of thought. Well, you have to keep an open mind as a young man. I'm no longer young, but I still retain that part of myself. The part of ourselves that came before us is now superpositional with who we are at this moment. And of course we project into the future. Well, that's a very good thing to do, but it's difficult because nobody can fully predict the future. This even comes up in quantum mechanics. So these are basic issues that get philosophized very naturally. We're philosophical beings. So let's talk about these three men. The man at the bottom, one of my heroes, Curt Jaimungal, operates out of Toronto, and he has got the most polished, in my opinion, I have to say that as a scientist. He does his homework. He's simpatico as far as he personally can engineer. He wants his guest to be comfortable, but he also wants to prod the guest to say stuff that the viewing audience wants to hear. Well, it should be titillating, tantalizing, perhaps controversial. Of course. That's what it's all about in the philosophy realm. It's about debate. Because in philosophy, you're looking for an avenue. Well, then you have to choose. All right, so that's psychology, that's philosophy. I think you understand. We're all on the same page, whether we admit it or not. Now, we've developed in different directions, but we all start out the same. Come on. Lex Fridman takes that approach too. He's interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah, the Zionist from Israel, the head of the IDF essentially, because his platform, the way he presents himself, the way Lex Fridman presents himself, as an even-handed, antiseptic interviewer of anybody who has something important to say. So it's not like, he interviewed Hitler and therefore he's a Nazi. No. Although, that those thoughts enter in because it's possible for a person to be like that. Goebbels was a propagandist, very popular because he's persuasive, but was he telling the truth? No. So, reality is not what it seems, says Donald Hoffman. Now, in the very brief interview that I saw, I was favorably impressed with Donald Hoffman. And my impression, I would say, if I were to relate it to the people who recommended Donald to me, and I have attempted this, I get very positive feedback. Oh my God, I told you, you can trust Donald Hoffman. That's not exactly what I'm saying. Now, Bernardo Kastrup came up on the Curt Jaimungal show as a co-guest with Tim Maudlin. And I'm not going to classify or characterize these men, but they were brought together for a reason. And I actually participated in a discussion a few months before that interview between Bernardo Kastrup and Tim Maudlin, where it was suggested in the comment sequence that it's time to get Bernardo and Tim together. And sure enough, just a few months later, they appeared on the Curt Jaimungal show. It was a fiasco. Highly embarrassing to Curt, who, to his credit, he performed perfectly, but there was nothing he could do about the animosity that existed between Bernardo and Tim. And both men are guilty, and I have done video sequences to outline, to kind of bring to the surface what the fuck happened between these two so-called scientists. Well, their personalities entered into it is what happened, and it destroyed the conversation. Within 3 minutes, it was unbelievable. It was horrendous. A real blight, but not on Curt. Actually, Curt is to be commended and lauded that he didn't remove that. I thought that he had removed that video, but it turns out that the way I was searching for it was incorrect. And he sent me a message. That is, he made a comment in response to me because he saw my video, and I was just flabbergasted that Curt watched one of my videos. Was because the title said Curt Jaimungal interviews Bernardo Kastrup and Tim Maudlin. So he found it because he's a very good researcher. He keeps tabs on what's going on around him. Oh man, that's a very good thing to do. Well, he noticed that I had made a mistake and he corrected it. I is so grateful. I went back, I found it, I made apologies. Oh, you got to admit when you've made a mistake or you're not a scientist. That leads us into our topic. When you take a philosophical view and then you stand up for it and you promote it, what you're implying, whether you want to or not, is that you're right more than the other philosophies are right. So that needs to be brought into debate. That's why we have philosophy, is to conflict. It's supposed to be healthy. Generally speaking, well, it should be. Debates don't usually result in any tangible outcome, but there is a surface to it. That is, what is happening overall is good, because a wider public than just the scientists themselves are being exposed to issues that may be of vital interest to some people or many people. Well, that's always good. You want to be open and forthright, open-minded, fearless. But you also don't want to become a pundit. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner. You don't want to start exaggerating. It's easy to do once you have a vested interest because your emotions become involved. It's part of being human. Now, science is meant to cut through that. It's really an escape hatch from irrationality. Now, irrationality is not all bad. And I think a moment's thought will convince you of that. Is love bad because it's irrational? Well, then you could go into the philosophy room and talk about cases, and I don't think you're going to get anywhere except in the general sense. You're airing it out. You're getting it out in the open so that you can use your rational logic upon the situation to decide, to determine, to make decisions. That's what we do as humans. We're looking for decision-making capability. If we can master that, we could possibly master the future of our own lives. That's somewhere in the background at all times. We're trying to become better men. All right. How does saying reality is not what it seems constitute anything scientific? It may or may not. I don't want to explore that. I just throw the question out. Reality. Okay. The Polya method that I follow dictates very simply that the first step in solving a problem is to define your terms. Now, I added that. That's not explicitly what Polya Georg said, the Stanford genius who wrote How to Solve a Problem, which has gone into several editions. But the very first step is to state the question as clearly as you can. I advocate a position that I've determined empirically is true enough, that when you do that, you follow the Polya method, and you try to state the question as clearly as you can. If you follow that rigorously, it very often leads you on the solution vector. Well, that's what we want in science, is at least to get on the solution vector. For instance, when we study cosmology, perhaps we cannot fully get the origin of the universe. Maybe or maybe not. But it's a question that maybe nobody ever really thought about. Now, is reality what it seems? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe you never thought of that. Bernardo Kastrup. You see the title there. Now, this may not be his own words. He may not have had any control over this. Same with Donald Hoffman. The illusion of matter. Well, I've studied Bernardo's thesis. He has a 7-part, well-organized series of videos where he very clearly lays out what he says about what he's talking about, which is reality. So we're talking about reality today. We would like to get an overview of what are the hot topics in reality. That is the philosophy of reality. You'd have to say it's philosophy, but doesn't science study reality? Of course. What's the difference? In science, you have to prove everything you say. I believe that that is a very clear directive. In philosophy, you don't have to prove what you say. But when it comes to proof, when it comes to very big issues, such as the nature of matter, such as the nature of energy, or of the universe, or of time, space, things like that, why, these are... I mean, I think you know, I don't need to explain to you that these are very deep issues. What would be a very simple issue? Well, does the sun go around the earth? Well, for a long time you may have heard that a large consensual body of men, in some sense, thought that the sun went around the earth. Why did they think that when we know it's not true? Because it looks like it. When you... Every child sees the sun rise in the east and set in the west. Well, in a way, that's an illusion. The sun is not rising in the east and setting in the west. And then right back to the philosophy room, you get the flat earthers who have a different perspective, which maybe or maybe not you need to know about. What are the flat earthers saying? You can take it to extremes. There are people who have seen UFOs. Well, can they prove it? Never have been able to prove it. And that's debated, because the Air Force has photos of these things. Well, is it a glitch? Is it doctored? You have to get the evidence so you can evaluate the evidence, but then you have to trust. Can you trust your own senses? Can you trust numbers? Here's what I want to say. You also have to consider structure. Structure is not numbers, it's relationships. And this is a necessary part of any logician's approach to reality, in any sense, scientific or otherwise. So when we're talking about something like reality, we need to define our term. And according to the Polya method, and I can tell you this stands up as an inductive empirical principle that I found valid. If you do that, you redefine the question so that it's as clearly stated as possible. That gets down to the terms and the structure of the terms. The relationship between the things that you're trying to juxtapose. Okay, in both cases, Kastrup and Hoffman, matter. Okay, matter, that's real. Reality, well, that would include matter. So we're talking about somewhat the same thing. Objective reality, including matter. Bernardo says, and I can verify this is accurate, he says that matter is illusory. What does he mean by that? He knows perfectly well that that's a provocative thing to say, and then he makes his case. Okay, Hoffman says, reality is not what it seems. Okay, well let's just concentrate on that so we know what we're saying. Reality is not what it seems. Well, reality is defined as what something seems. That's reality to a human. Is what it seems, that's reality for that human. But there's more to it because you can be fooled. Does the sun fly around the earth? Well, that's what it seems, so that's reality. Is it? No, reality is not what it seems, so Hoffman has a good case to make. Because the sun does not fly around the earth. Now, the illusion of matter. What would be a non-illusory thing? It would be matter. So Bernardo says, oh no, even matter is illusory. So he's knocking the struts out from what we consider to be reality and or matter. And I'm putting these together because they're related. They have to do with what we think we know. And these men are saying what you think you know is not actually true. It's an illusion. It's not what it seems. I have seen entire videos on time is not real. PBS Spacetime, I did a whole video on it. Time is not real. Really? Matter is not real. Really? Reality is not real. Really? Wow! I tuned in. I'm still fascinated with this because it shows how we think. And also, it shows how we cannot think clearly. That's the whole reason for science, is to enable us to think clearly so that we can communicate truth. I know it sounds deeply philosophical, and perhaps you would want to get me into the philosophy room and we could debate. I would probably want some beer to help me in that, because I loosen up and I tend to drop my guard. That's what you want. To expose your own hypocrisy, to expose your own thought processes to yourself. Because when you're a scientist, you're going to expose your thought processes to others, including the innocent. Children, youth, students, seekers, people who are looking for something or somebody. We tend to make heroes. I do. I know I shouldn't, in a certain sense. But in another sense, I can't help it and I accept it. Well, that's two different points of view that conflict. And I think that's what we are as humans, to put it philosophically. So I'm laying out for you how I approach this kind of stuff. I instinctively don't like it. And that's a problem. That's a problem for me, because now I'm not fearless. Now I'm showing signs of strain, stress, reactivity. I'm being biased. I'm going to be prejudiced. I have a stand to take. I have to defend it. I don't like this. I don't like this. I never want to do that. But inevitably, I do, and I think, actually, we all must. I'm speaking for all of us, and that's projecting. That may not be fair to you. But I am a presenter, and I'm trying to get into the mix. And what I deal with now is far beyond what I foresaw I would ever be dealing with 3 years ago, when all I did was I presume, because I proved to myself that I discovered a new geometry. Really? Come on! So everything goes deep ultimately. Nothing is superficial in this life. Certainly not in science. You have to question everything, including yourself. So here's what I was leading up to, and this will be the end of this rather lengthy philosophical discursus. What is actually going on YouTube? What's going on in the mass dissemination of vaudeville information? We're tuning in to these channels, such as Curt's and Lex's and others, in order to be stimulated, because we're bored. Well, that's human. There's nothing wrong with that. I watch cartoons. I watch comedy. I watch UFC fights, and I'm not even a violent man. We won't go into that, but I'm a pacifist, and yet I watch UFC. So obviously there are two sides in conflict, certainly in myself, and I don't want to be in conflict, so I tend to accept a lot. Well, one's overall attitude towards life, towards presenting science, it'll come out who you are. What are you aiming for? What is your goal? Well, for Curt, I think it's simply to educate a wider audience to the possibilities of looking into scientific matters more deeply. Is that what happens? Come on. We all know, nobody has time. People get locked into their niche in life, but they're reaching out because of instinct or desire, or however you want to put it. No man wants to be fully left out of science. Of course we're interested. When you see those photographs of galaxies, or you see this molecular structure that can be shown with a good science presentation, you might suddenly become interested in biology and start turning to that science for more information, which can be proved. Now, what these men such as Kastrup and Hoffman are doing is answering a felt need of society. They're trying to address the most difficult questions that just frustrate, enrage, just throw us into a tizzy. And we can't escape it. We're born into this. So it was here before us. So each man, myself included, encounters it anew. Well, there is a unbelievably common pattern that when you're exposed to E equals mc squared, that there is only one reaction. You're absolutely humiliated. You're frustrated. You're enraged. You're angry. Well, I can't understand that. Well, that's jealousy. That's healthy. You're frustrated because you know you can't understand what these men are excited about. Why would you be interested in the Einstein field equation? In several conversations I've had over the decades with family, friends, and whoever, you mention Einstein, that's the end of the conversation. Because the person, Einstein, oh, I can't. They're frustrated. They show it. They're angry. They're unhappy. Because you know something that you cannot share to them. And so they hate you. And you end up hating them. This is absolutely the wrong course. We have to divorce our emotions from science. We have to. Well, these men don't. And what they're trying to do is play both ends toward the middle. That has an excellent overall effect, but it also carries an extraordinary danger because they pretend to be scientists. They're not. And I've already said that I admire these men, that they have a valid place in the system of science, but you have to be more definite about it. Where do these men fit into science? I look for that. How are you promoting science? A man, I'll just throw out a well-known name. Well, I won't name him, but he's someone who, it's Richard Dawkins, okay? So he wants to be this man, so let him be that man. Well, he's a clay pigeon. He stood up and said, there's no God. Science has disproved God. And he stands his ground. Well, that's admirable. But is it true? Of course not. It has nothing to do with true or false. It's just his opinion. But he says he's a scientist. He's a deceiver. And so is Bernardo. And so is Donald. They've compromised themselves in order to serve your sordid, lowest common denominator need for titillation because you're bored out of your mind and you don't know what to do to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So you look to these goddamned heroes. And Curt Jaimungal is going down the road to hell too. I still admire him. I still put him at the top. But he is on the way down, and it shows in everything he does. He's an entertainer. He's not a scientist. He's going the wrong way. These men are misleading you. Calculatedly. I don't think it's personally conscious to themselves. But I'm sorry, that's no excuse. You have to learn to distinguish between what can be proved and what cannot be proved. And as long as you're dealing in the philosophy realm, you're fine. But as soon as you start saying you're speaking for science, then you're an evolutionist. Then you're a cosmologist. You're a liar. You're a threat. You're a threat to the real system. I stand up for the real system. And now you know. I am totally emotionally committed. I am against all these men. Not completely, and I hope I brought that out clearly. But this is a completely negative report card on these jackasses who pretend to speak for science. You had better tune into Anagalactic, because I do speak for science. And in the next presentation, I'm going to give you the first and only scientifically accurate, provable definition of reality and of consciousness. And if you don't know me by now, you're going to know me right now. I will approach it geometrically. That is the only way to approach these crazy questions. And I'll give you what these men cannot deliver. What is reality? What is consciousness? All right, and then we'll go on to matter and energy and space and time, which I've been dealing with for 760 video lectures. Pure science? No. I'm human. I think you can tell. I'm happy, though. I want you to be happy, all right? You're not going to be happy if you're a scientist and you're listening to this shit. You need a rational foundation for these deepest of all questions. Consciousness and reality. What are they? I'll tell you. They won't. They'll lead you away from the truth. Because that's safest for the lowest common denominator moron. Even an American can appreciate these people. That's not a compliment. Keep looking up. I'll bring you the secrets of the universe, of consciousness and reality in the next video. Stay tuned, or you're stuck with them. Good luck. We'll be right back.